Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer your emails, and I thought I would actually do a lightning round, or I'd actually really try to answer as many emails as possible in the shortest amount of time. So we have a question from Discord. Eleanor says, Dr. Kirk, can you break down age regression and all the different stages and the reasons for it? Yeah, it's a great question. So in brief, there's lots of literature on regression going back to Freud, Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud, Anna Freud, many others. And it's complicated, but also kind of simple. They involve different Freudian psychosexual stages, like the Oedipal phase. There might be talk about regressing to the anal phase and that kind of thing. But I use it to refer to, I think, the fundamentals of regression that Freud and Anna Freud, Sigmund Freud and Anna Freud put out, and many others will use it this way as well, that under stress, we might all use regression to cope with that stress. For example, if you're at a new job, you might regress to an earlier age, like you're a kindergartner, because that's when you remember going to a new social environment for the first time. And so you might regress, all of us might do this, where at a new job, we might start acting like a kindergartner. We become shy and we feel insecure and we're scared. And we feel those feelings and we behave in that way. We do this because it feels comfortable, because we're used to being in that mode when we're in that context. And also, we believe that it will elicit care. We are hoping that people will see us as defenseless and young and in need, and thus people will care for us the way one might care for a young child. You will see this in your own children when they feel threatened or they're scared or something, and they feel distant from you as parents. They might regress to a younger stage, and you'll notice this. They start talking like they're 4 years old when they're 8, and it'll maybe even annoy you. And that's them trying to elicit a similar attachment style, a similar attentiveness that parents will provide 4-year-olds as opposed to 8-year-olds. So that's why all of us do this. Pathologically, people might become so-called fixated in a phase from either trauma growing up or trauma in the present, meaning that they're frequently in that state, if not maybe even always in that state. And as an example, we might look to Nicole and Azan from 90 Day Fiancé. Especially when she was around her mother, seemingly acted like a 4-year-old. She would whine a lot and act very incompetent. And, you could argue maybe like a 12-year-old as well. It's hard to know. It depends on the eye of the beholder. But we could see that in Nicole. It was a frequent state that she was in. And with Anfisa, George and Anfisa, my conceptualization is that she could be characterized as being fixated in a young teen or tween phase in which people generally feel very insecure and very unsure of themselves and resort to acting tough and aloof as a way of staving off insecurity and bullying and that kind of thing. Because she has a normal mode where she comes across as extremely aloof and like she doesn't care about anything. But we all know that tweens and teenagers that act that way are very, very insecure, and they deeply care about approval, but they're desperately trying hard not to come across that way. And Anfisa acts that way to me, in my eyes, especially when you hear her talk when she doesn't know she's on camera or doesn't see the cameras, and she's talking to George on the phone, and you can hear her saying things that are very much not tough and very much not aloof. You know what I mean? All right, next email. All right, next email, upper tier patron Elan from New York City. She says, what do you recommend to those suffering from undue anxiety over academics? My stepdaughter is about 2 years into college and has struggled the whole time with intense anxiety over her schoolwork. Each time an assignment comes up, she believes she can't do it, and she gets a huge amount of anxiety and has breakdowns over it. This is despite the fact that she gets good grades. She's in therapy, but it doesn't seem to be helping or giving her the tools to deal with this. What sort of tools or type of therapy would you recommend to someone experiencing this sort of thing? End of email. Well, yeah. Number one, I would say schema-oriented therapy or psychodynamic therapy that looks at the awareness of the underlying schemas so that you can have power over it, and of course corrective experiences to correct for those experiences. You would want to look at perfectionism, perhaps OCPD, this kind of thing, meaning that for some people with this sort of anxiety, they have a belief system based on their early childhood relational traumas that if they aren't perfect in this way, then they will lose everything, not just their career, but their life. They'll fall into an abyss. A lot of us are in the process of running away from an unknown abyss, some unknown annihilation that we all worry about. And there's a chance that that's what's happening. Also, you want to do behaviorism sort of therapy, exposure therapy to habituate to actually getting bad, two lines of habituation exposure that I would do with someone is, one, they need to be exposed to half-assing homework. So we would I would give them an exercise, and of course they would have to be up for this, where they will actually only work on an assignment for half the time they would normally. And they have to sit with that anxiety, and they have to become habituated to it. Now, if that's overwhelming to the person, then you have to have a gradual increase in intensity, and you want to get to that point. But once you get to that point, then the person can half-ass an assignment. Now, to them, half-assing is actually doing it pretty well. The other exposure is to getting a bad grade or getting a less than perfect grade. People with these kinds of perfectionisms, they're running from something that is actually not dangerous, is actually not something that's that bad. For them to even fail a class in college, it often has no bearing on the rest of your life. Sometimes it does, but I don't know, not usually. Usually you can take the class over again. So I might not necessarily suggest the person fail a class, but if they were up for it, I would actually have them do that, because that's, if you could live with and get used to, and again, you got to get your body used to the stimulus of half-assing an assignment or getting a bad grade or maybe even failing a class. And once your body experiences that, then your body is no longer afraid of it. The other therapy is cognitive therapy, where you work on the automatic thoughts and the mindset that's related to schema therapy. Also, emotional regulation skills is very important. Also, existentialism and existential therapy, specifically the brand or the line of questioning regarding why are you here? What's your purpose? For me, for example, when I have anxiety about something like this, and I remind myself that I'm not put on this planet to be perfect at that sort of thing, it helps me to reorient myself towards what's important to me. And I think, well, if I, don't do well in this sort of thing, like, I don't care. That's not really why I'm on this planet. On my deathbed, I'm not going to care about whether or not I'd got a perfect score on this and that. And another aspect of this is, for some people, and many young people, they don't know why they're on this planet. So without having a purpose, without having meaning to your life, you're just a set of reactions to things like this. And thus you have no foundation to fall back on. You might literally see yourself completely through these kinds of perfectionisms. And, so that might take a while to develop. Like, why am I on this planet? Like, why am I here? When I die, what do I want to look back on? That kind of thing. And so without that, people can be lost in their anxieties. Also, ongoing support from y'all, from the family and other people. Maybe slowing down would be another thing to do, taking a year off, that kind of thing. And also looking at societal pressure, feminism, socialization, this sort of thing, because a lot of young people are socialized to believe that their entire existence depends on these kinds of things, particularly at that age. I'll hear people who are 18 to 20 of a certain class will just be completely obsessed with like what school they're going to and the internship that they're getting. And I just keep thinking, well, God knows what you're going to want to do with your career in 5, 10, 20 years, because you're too young to know. Because I remember when I was in college, a stat that would be thrown around, I don't know the veracity of it, but they said that by the time you graduate with your bachelor's degree at the age of 22 or 23, you will have changed your major or your career path in your head an average of 7 times. And I remember that being told to me many times, and thus, feel free to explore what you want to do with the rest of your life and make plans and maybe try to gear your life in that direction. But in all likelihood, you're going to change because people change. They change their preference. They figure out other things. And that was certainly true for me. I mean, I didn't know I wanted to be a therapist until one day when I was 24 years old. It never occurred to me. So it's another thing that I feel like kids need to really beat into their heads, that they have a lot of time and they should give themselves that time. You've heard me rant about that before. But anyway, that's what I would say about that. All right, this next email is from upper tier patron D-Dubs from BC. She says, when one person who has narcissistic tendencies is in a codependent relationship with a codependent person, can that other codependent person become more grandiose? Is grandiosity contagious? End of email. Yeah. So with codependency, in my deep dive, I delineated between 3 different types. I don't know if other people have come up with these types, but I didn't see any literature stating this. But I feel like it's important when we talk about these personality issues, disorders, that we delineate the types, because it, 1, really helps me to better understand it, and 2, helps to see it when it's more elusive. And there were 3 types. One was the controlling type, which is kind of the classic codependent. The other is the accommodating type, which is another classic codependent, and often mistaken with a dependent personality disorder, which is really the opposite of that. And the third type that I identified was the chameleon type. I think I might have said, and I do believe that it is a rarer type, but that's what you're talking about, where you have someone who grew up in an environment, traumatic relational environment, in which they were forced and or rewarded to be someone that took care of someone else who was having a problem, someone else that had an ongoing chronic issue that was intensely impacting the family and themselves. And it was their role to take care of that person. And it was a very difficult role, 1, because it was an intense problem that they're trying to take care of, but also because they were too young to even comprehend or be able to handle that kind of responsibility. They had to give up their childhood. There's a lot of anger about that. And the 3 different types of dealing with that as an adult is to find someone who is in need of being helped, like someone that suffers from a disorder or substance abuse problem or something like that. And then you will control them. You will say to them, you will do what I say because you're incompetent. Or you could be an accommodating type, where you might be always enabling them, always trying to pick up pieces around them to save them from consequences while keeping them in that dependent position, that under-functioning position. And then the third type, which is a rarer type in my anecdotal observation, is the chameleon type, where you just become like the person who has a problem. So a classic example is you have someone suffering from a substance abuse problem, and the chameleon codependent will just also develop a substance problem as a way of trying to accommodate the underfunctioner. You're trying to make them feel better about themselves by adopting their problem, but you don't actually have that problem. You're just acting like, and this is an unconscious effort, of course. And there's various other reasons why one might chameleon, but with grandiosity, I guess, I don't know if I've seen this, but I could imagine that you have someone that is on the narcissistic spectrum, and that is causing problems socially and otherwise. And so the codependent chameleon will become more grandiose, will become more narcissistic, like the underfunctioner, and thus that accommodates the narcissistic underfunctioner by, justifying them by saying, well, we're all like this, or I'm like that too, or, that kind of thing. All right, this next email is from annual upper tier patron, anonymous upper tier patron. She says, could you talk about post-coital dysmorphia? Post-coital dysmorphia. I have recently become intimate with my best friend. The sex has been effing fantastic, the best I've ever had, and him as well. But after orgasm, he falls into this crushing depression that can last up to hours or even days. He didn't have this before being with me. Googling has brought me to postcoital dysmorphia. Have you had contact with this before in your practice and know of anyone who suffers from it? End of email. I can't recall working with anyone that had severe symptoms along these lines, but I have talked with clients about this in a lesser form, like after sex or masturbation or any sexual experience. Some people will report having a temporary dip in mood or a sudden shift in perspective. Like people will talk about masturbation, and while they're ramping up to it, ramping up to orgasm, they feel very into it, if you will. And then as soon as that is over, they feel ashamed of themselves or, guilty for having done it or that sort of thing. And so there's no guilt prior and lots of guilt after, and that can affect one's mood. So when it comes to postcoital dysmorphia, we've studied it quite a lot over the years, and it seems to affect about 3% of people on a regular basis. And the following theories or conceptualizations that could guide treatment are the following. These are the conceptualizations that I would explore with people. The first thing I would think about is trauma, right? Sexual abuse, attachment trauma. Because when we have sex, we open ourselves up, we become vulnerable, and we long for people, and that could trigger people, obviously, in a variety of ways. And there's a fair amount of individuals, maybe even particularly men, who are unaware of their relational and sexual traumas, such that they feel terrible after having a sexual encounter and have no awareness that their abuse is being triggered. So that's one avenue. Or even attachment traumas, right? Being abandoned or harmed in a non-sexual way, a relational way, and having sex with someone could trigger that. The second avenue I would explore is sex negativity, often as a result of religion, but just from our society. A tremendous amount of shame that could come into play. And I've worked with people along these lines. Even if they tell me, no, I'm sex positive, I've shed all of those notions about sex negativity, I no longer have those thoughts. And that's great. The person has progressed quite a bit in their conscious mind, but in their subconscious mind, they have not. They still consider sex to be shameful. Like in the example of the masturbation shame afterwards, 99.9% of the time, it's because of that. It's because they cognitively, for the most part, are like, yeah, masturbation's fine. But in their soul or in their foundation of their personality, they were indoctrinated into a notion that masturbation is shameful and that there's something wrong with them. And so it's hard to fight against that. And so that would be another cause. The third major umbrella for cause to look into is biology. It seems like maybe we evolved a response to orgasm to return to the norm. It's hard to know if this is true, but there's a lot of biology and brain chemistry involved in arousal and sexual interest. And one of the sort of broad aspects of the process of having sex is a ramping up of arousal and of sexual interest, of attraction, of longing, and wanting to touch someone, wanting to look in someone else's eyes, and also a shutting down of some processes, like our fear centers can see a diminishing aspect to it, which makes sense, right? Like you need to be focused, you need to not let things get in the way. And for people that haven't been abused and haven't recovered from the abuse, they will often have a lot of euphoria, a lot of living in the moment, a lot less fear, a lot less self-consciousness. And again, this is people who have not been traumatized. And a lot of that has to do with brain chemistry, or some of it seemingly does. And then as soon as the sex is over, the brain adjusts back to the norm, and there's a possibility that the brain, for some people, like 1% or 2%, their brain overcorrects, and so they suddenly feel a tremendous amount of sadness, a tremendous amount of fear, a tremendous amount of irritability and depression, because that euphoric response and the during sex and ramping up to sex, that euphoric anti-anxiety effect might have too much of a bounce back. And for the vast majority of people, they don't have that overcorrection, but some do. All right, let's take a break. Come back. More upper tier patron emails. All right, we're back from the break. This next email is from upper tier patron Audrey from Earth. She says, I wondered if you have learned about TEAM-CBT, T-E-A-M, TEAM-CBT, developed by David Burns. End of email. Well, Audrey, no, I've never heard of it before, but I just Googled it. And apparently the TEAM stands for testing, empathy, agenda setting, and methods. And I'm guessing that it has more of an emphasis on empathy because, testing, agenda, methods, it's very common to CBT, but empathy often isn't emphasized enough. And I think with more research coming out that empathy and the relationship is highly related and causal to positive outcomes in therapy, CBT individuals are trying to, practitioners, theorists are trying to integrate more humanistic ideas such as empathy into the therapy. And so that's just a guess, but no, I've never heard of it before. And it's interesting to read about. All right, this next email is from upper tier patron Aaron from Berkeley, because earlier to a previous email from Aaron, I was like, I didn't realize Berkeley was spelled Berkeley. She says, thank you so much for responding to my other email. This is a follow-up and a question. I lack connection to my dad, probably due to divorce, but I do my best to fake a connection with him when I'm with him. Now I'm starting college and he wants me to move near him. Frankly, that sounds awful if I still can't connect and have to keep performing the relationship, but he really wants me to come live in his area. I'm willing to do it if I could form a real bond with him, but how? I don't think family therapy is the way because I can't admit the real issue, which is being emotionally indifferent to him, as it would crush him, reveal years of lies, and permanently harm our relationship. So if I take the risk to move, how likely is a real attachment to form naturally through quality time alone? How likely is a typical parent-child bond to be formed naturally through quality time after years of emotional indifference? End of email. Yeah, well, Aaron, I don't know. There's so many factors. You might not be a good fit for each other. I mean, it's just hard to know. But I will say that a lot of people, parents and children included, have a great motivation to bond with people that they wouldn't otherwise, right? And if you just met him, there's a chance that you would never bond with him. But given that he is your father, and it sounds like you have at least some affinity towards him, there's a chance that things will work out. What's the chance of it happening? I don't know. I imagine he's looking for that, so he's motivated. And if you're up for it, I could see it happening. It might take some time. I've heard many people talk about things like this where they will maybe even meet their father after never seeing him after 27 years, like an anonymous patron wrote in a little bit ago about that. And there's so much energy there and so much meaning for people. And so there's that. The other thing is, Aaron, if you don't want to, then don't. You're not obligated just because he is your dad and he wants to do this. If you're not up for it, if you're just like, yeah, I've never had a connection with him and I don't really care to have one, then I wouldn't bother. I mean, it's up to you. But if you want to give it a shot, then I could see it working. I don't know to what depth you would develop a relationship with him, but I could see it working. It sounds like he's really interested in that. You say that family therapy isn't the way because you can't admit the real issue. Well, one, you don't have to necessarily word it that way. Like, by the way, I've been lying to you all these years, acting like I have a connection with you when I don't. You could just word it differently. Like, Dad to be in family therapy, and you can do this outside family therapy too. You should be, Dad, by the way, I don't know if I've been completely honest with you, because there have been times when I just feel distant from you because of our history, and I've acted cordial around you, but there's a part of me that feels very distant from you. And, so you just talk along those lines. He probably feels that anyway, or at the very least, if you presented that in a way of saying, but I'd like that to be different, then I'm guessing he would actually take you up on that. The other thing is that, in therapy, even if you just flat out told him the truth, and he would be crushed potentially, but them's the breaks. And I'm sure you had reasons for doing that, and a therapist would be there to help with that. And that might be really healing, right? All right. This next email is from upper tier patron Julia from New York. She says, is it possible that my mother could sexually objectify me if she is narcissistic? Just chiming in here. Yeah. I mean, being narcissistic doesn't necessarily mean that your mother would sexually objectify you, of course, but could someone being narcissistic result in that? Yeah, particularly if they were sexually objectified when they were young, they might actually define their narcissistic supply partially through you. So it's just one of those, possible bad effects of being a child of someone with narcissism. You also say, is my mother capable of loving me because of her narcissism? Just chiming in here. Yeah, absolutely. The way the internet talks, and frankly, a lot of clinicians talk about narcissistic individuals, is that they're incapable of love. What they're, I think, referring to as psychopathy. And even psychopaths can love other people. Some can't, but many can anyway. But narcissistic individuals can absolutely love people. In fact, they often do. Their love might be more primitive, in that they haven't had a chance to really grow in their empathy and their love for other people. So their love might be more dependent, might be more that of a child. So it's possible that your mom does love you, but in the way that she might love a parent, in a way, in that it's more one directional, if that makes any sense. But yeah, your mom is capable of love for sure. Now, for some narcissistic individuals, their trauma is being triggered so frequently that they don't have capacity for love and time for that. You also ask, is it okay that I do not love my mother and my father? You say here, I am learning that I had been sexually traumatized by a variety of terrifying childhood experiences where I was neglected, unsafe, and taught that no matter what happens to me, it's my fault. End of email. Yeah, well, Julia, I'm so sorry that you went through this. It sounds horrific to have both parents having problems like that and harming you is very insidious. The emotional abuse and the schemas developed is, it can really just affect you the rest of your life. So I'm sorry you went through that. You say, is it okay that I do not love my parents? Absolutely. People ask this question to me, and I think, yes. Now, it's hard, and I've worked with a lot of clients who, at least from my citizen's point of view, I'm like, why do you even talk to your parents? I mean, your parents are horrific individuals that put you through hell when you were young. So screw them, really. Like, I had a client once where the parents had sexually abused the kid for 10 years. And now she was in her 40s or something. And she was still interacting with the parents and really trying to gain their approval, and felt very triggered, obviously, by her parents, because her parents were the abusers sexually and otherwise when she was growing up. And, I didn't berate or pressure my client, but there would be moments where I would have notions or messages around just like, are you sure you want to be in a relationship with these people? I mean, what do you get out of it? That kind of a thing. I mean, I wouldn't word it that way or tone it that way, but it was along those lines. And I get it, because especially when you've never been given approval or love from your parents, you always long for it. So you just keep returning to that well. And, parents connection, it's meaningful, and there's nothing inherently pathological about returning to that well and trying to eke out as much love and attention that you can from those individuals. There's nothing inherently dysfunctional about it. But in my head, I will frequently think, And some people are like this, where they just say, I want to return to that well, but rationally, I don't. I'm done, because it hurts me too much, and I want to have a chosen family. I want to choose my own siblings and my own parents from people in my life, mentors, this sort of thing. And although that doesn't fix my internalized trauma, it staves off any new trauma that could happen. And although there's something I'm giving up by, an opportunity to develop a relationship with my parents, I'm okay with that, because I have one life to live and I'm done with them. And absolutely, it's fine. And you're not going to get a lot of support from others, or I don't know, it kind of depends. Some people might be very supportive of that and some people might not. But I would certainly support that. So, if you don't love them, you say, is it okay that I don't love them? Yeah, it's completely okay. It's rational. It makes sense that you don't love them. It's totally understandable. Love is earned. Love is something that you earn. It's not automatic. Now, children should be automatically loved, but parents need to earn their love. They need to earn our respect. They need to earn our attention. And if they don't earn that, then they don't get it. Then they don't deserve it. So if they didn't treat you well enough to earn your respect and your love and your admiration, then you're under no obligation to give it. All right, this next email is from upper tier patron Eileen from Montreal. They say, I'm curious to know whether there is research in psychology on how to navigate and manage online harassment, especially as more and more people like yourself are required to be online for their work. Personally, I found your podcast at a time when I was dealing with PTSD from online harassment and appreciated how positive your online community was and the nuance you brought to the world. End of email. Well, thanks, Eileen. That's nice of you to say. And I'm glad that you can identify having PTSD from online harassment. Technically speaking, the DSM doesn't really allow for that. I find that to be ridiculous. I've talked about this before. The DSM criterion regarding certain events as only, I won't go down that road. But anyway, but in my book, yes, you can absolutely develop PTSD, and people have, from online harassment. Anyway, so, and I feel like I was starting to develop a minor form of PTSD over the past, time of maybe in the past few months, but I think really just ongoing. And incidentally, I was listening to an old rerun of me and Berto talking about something 6 years ago, and I was marveling at how relaxed I sounded. And I don't know, I feel relaxed now, but I think I was more relaxed in the past. And I think part of that is just a conscious decision to make my content more buttoned up, more, palatable to the general audience. But also, I think it's because my body clenches up a little bit in a way that I didn't before, because before there weren't that many people listening or watching, and thus I didn't have a lot of people attacking me. So anyway, so I've developed the following technique, and I'm sure it'll change over time, but it's become pretty elaborate over the years, and particularly over the last 2 years, and particularly over the last few months. So here's what I do. Oh, you asked about research. Yeah, there is some research on this topic, but it's not very useful. There's not a lot of literature out there yet. There's a fair amount, but regarding the question of well, how do you deal with this? What are you supposed to do? And the tips out there are fairly obvious and simplistic, don't go on the internet very often, that kind of stuff, or go to therapy, or have a supportive person, that kind of thing. Have moderators, pretty obvious things. But I think I can add a very important element, which I'll get to in a second. But the following, I just sort of brainstorm this right now, but I think I kind of like this list as it stands for now, is one, I only look at comments when I'm ready, even the good ones, because you never know when a hurtful one is going to be in there somewhere. So I will not just casually look at comments or direct messages or emails. I will, I'll gear myself up for it. I'll be like, okay, am I in a place where if there is a negative comment that I can handle it? Like, one of the things that I don't do is I don't look at things like along those lines late at night, because if I'm triggered at, 11:30, I won't sleep well or won't be able to sleep at all. So I have to make sure that I'm in a good space. Now, 99% of the time, there's nothing that will trigger me, even if there is criticism. But, it's happened enough times that I have to, account for that 1% of the time so that my life isn't, too negatively impacted. Particularly in some areas, right? So there are places that I can go, like Discord, for example, and feel completely free. And I will look at Discord late at night. But if I'm going to look on YouTube in particular, and particularly like the trial videos, I really have to be careful about when or even if I do that. So there's that. The other thing that I do along these lines is I'll take a break occasionally. I'll notice that I'm kind of compulsively checking comments and communications, and it doesn't feel good to me. And so I'll say, I'll close all those tabs and I'll put it in my calendar, like, check so-and-so area in 2 days, just kind of give yourself a little breather. And I guess along those lines, another thing that I try to put out there, and this relates to your question, Eileen, regarding if you work online, you might actually have to look at the comments, right? And what I try to do is I try to give the clear message to everyone that I'm not constantly looking at my social media or my email account. And I think some content providers give that impression that at any time you can contact them. And then if you tweet at them or you DM them and they don't get back to you, then the anger will build in people. And I hope that I've given the clear message, because it's true, that I'm not constantly looking at my communication avenues. I mean, my personal email I'm looking at, but people don't have access to that in the public. And I'll look at my text messaging and my personal Facebook Messenger. But aside from that, of which there are dozens of other avenues of communication to me because of the podcast, I try to give the impression like I might not even see it. I try, because I might not. I'll say that, like, if you comment below a YouTube video, there's a chance that I'll never see that. And if you really want to get a hold of me, then you have to you have to email through the website, that kind of thing, because I very will likely see it in that case. And along those lines, just while I'm on that topic, a lot of people, because of the trial video and my follow-up episodes, a lot of people were being very supportive. And I tried to reply to everyone, but occasionally I wouldn't. Or if there was a comment on a YouTube video, I wouldn't necessarily even see it, or I wouldn't comment. But if you did send me support, I did probably see it if I didn't get back to you, and very much appreciated it. So I need that in the same way that if I'm with my wife and I need her to compliment me occasionally or just spend time with me or make me feel loved, I need that feeling from you collectively, like not every single one of you, but a percentage of you, say 3% who actually reach out and say something supportive. Like, I need that. A long time ago, I realized that about myself. I could say something like, I don't need that, or I should be above that. And I don't actually believe that to be true. I think that I'm a regular human being with needs, and I don't think it's functional to act like I'm not. So, I mean, I'm doing this because of you. And frankly, aren't all content providers doing it because of the audience? I mean, that's the whole point, and thus would want some positive support from the audience. So anyway, because I think the common coping style people will say is just like, well, you just got to let it roll off your back. You got to have a thick skin. You got to like let it go and not pay attention. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I mean, with the haters, maybe, but not everyone. And during the trial, it wasn't just randos that were hating me. It was long-term patrons of the podcast were upset with me, which, doesn't which means that they know who I am and they know my track record, and yet they still were hurt by me. So when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, oh, I really should be paying attention to that, shouldn't I? I mean, and I want to know, and I want to repair that relationship. And so, I would put effort into that. The other thing that I do that I think everyone should do when they're dealing with online harassment or harm is processing your feelings. And what I would do often is I would talk with Stacy when we would be on our walks. I would talk about that with her, and she was supportive. Sometimes I would talk with Bob, and sometimes I would talk about it on the air, right? I would air my hurt, and it felt good to get off my chest, to know that people were listening, and then, a percentage of people would actually reach out and say, that they're supportive. And so that's another way of processing feelings. Another thing is I try to really internalize supportive emails and comments. It's so easy to let the supportive, nice comments just kind of get washed away. I sometimes will hear myself saying, well, they're just saying that because they're trying to be nice. And the nice thing is a lot of you, when you would comment or email in, it would come across as very sincere. It wasn't just like this little note, this little anonymous surface level comment. It would be very heartfelt, people's words. But even though that was happening, it's easy as a content provider to just think, well, people are being nice, or I'm sure they're just saying that. And so I would really try not to do that. I'd really try to internalize it and hold it in my heart, because I'm always trying to, because I cope well when I'm a professor. When I have 10 students who like me and one who doesn't like me, I manage that fairly well, or at least better than I do with online. I mean, I wouldn't say I deal with that professor situation well, but better than I do with the online stuff. I think because I can see the individuals, and even though the 10 students who like me might not ever say anything supportive, because why would they necessarily? But I don't know, just the relationship that I have with them, where I feel like, okay, we're doing stuff. I'm the professor, you're the student, and we're working together, and we're getting stuff done. That validation, that feeling of stability makes me feel like I'm standing on solid ground, even when one student isn't liking me very much, right? Whereas when I'm talking into the internet, it's just a faceless, amorphous crowd that I can't internalize. It's all, even people emailing and that kind of thing. It's like it's harder to internalize you. It's harder for me to feel you in my heart. But I can approximate that or approach that by really trying to envision human beings writing these emails and saying these things to me. And so that's another thing that I try to do. Because wouldn't that be the ideal, right? Because if I'm getting literally 99 nice comments and one bad one, why would I be upset, right? But I think a big part of it is the 99 nice comments, they just don't really get internalized. And so I'm trying to actually internalize them. I don't think I'm extremely successful in that, but I think a little bit. Another thing that I do is, and this is the new thing that I learned recently, which is that I need to not avoid the negative comments completely, because as with anyone with PTSD, what you do is you learn to avoid the traumatic stimulus, right? If you're traumatized when you're driving a car, you get in a car accident, you avoid getting into a car. If you're traumatized sexually, then you avoid sexual stimulus. And since I was being mildly traumatized by hurtful emails or comments, that sort of thing, I was avoiding completely. And I would ask Stacy to, I would say, hey, could you just read the comments? Let me know what's going on over there and tell me like anything good or bad. And she, over time, and I guess this is another aspect to the coping, is that she's so intimate with the content and with me as a human, as her husband, that she knows what comments she should pass along to me and which ones might be best if she doesn't. She's learned over time, because sometimes she'll tell me, well, there's kind of a few comments about this negative thing about you. And I'll have maybe an appreciative reaction like, oh yeah, it's good for me to know. Or I'll have a very bad overreaction. And she's learned over time, it's just like, oh, I should probably tell him this one, but maybe not that. And sometimes I'll even directly tell her, like, that comment, I'm glad you told me, but if you ever see that again, I probably don't need to hear that because there's not much I can do about that sort of thing. And just additional knowledge of people saying that, it's just going to bring me down. And it's going to, because another big part of this is, and this is a part of me actually working with Bob and Rebecca and Berto, is you want the content providers to feel good about providing content, right? If I absorb all of the negative comments and let it get under my skin, it'll ruin me as a content provider. I'll be too in my head. And there have been moments where it's been like that for Berto, incidentally, as well. And I think kind of maybe for the others, but definitely for me and kind of for Berto, that there'll be these moments I'll go through as a content provider. I'll notice myself in a video or an audio podcast, and I'm not myself. I'm second guessing everything I'm saying, and I'm talking on as if I'm backpedaling. And you cannot provide compelling, good content in that mindset. You have to feel safe. You have to be able to be free to say things and express opinion, especially with the style of content that I do. And so that's another aspect is just kind of monitoring that. But anyway, so I try not to avoid completely, because in the past I was more and more avoiding, more and more just like, I don't want to hear it. I can't hear it. It's too much for me. It's overwhelming. But as with PTSD or any other kind of personality disorder, the more you avoid, the more the stimulus becomes powerful. So the more I avoided the negativity over time, the more the negativity would affect me. And I wasn't habituating. I was becoming more and more avoidant. This is similar to any other kind of phobia. If you are afraid of spiders, for example, and say you have moderate to mild anxiety about spiders, the more you avoid spiders, the less you give your body a chance to be habituated to spiders, and thus the more anxiety you will have about spiders. And you will, in a ironic way, the more you avoid, the higher your anxiety goes. This is the downward spiral of PTSD. And so I was doing that to myself, but I didn't realize it until the trial negativity became so, I don't know, overwhelmingly difficult to avoid, I guess, and I had multiple opportunities, because there'll be moments where I'll have negative waves, but it'll be like one day, right? It wouldn't be like 3 months. So there were a lot of opportunities for me to question my approach and to brainstorm other kinds of approaches. And one of the things I eventually landed on after a while and brainstormed with Stacy, and she was actually extremely wary of this idea, but I think it turned out okay, is that I said, I'm just going to read every email that I got, every comment that I have about the trial that I haven't responded to yet, and even the negative ones, because I just feel like I need to just get my hands dirty and just really wade into it. I said, and Stacy's like, Kirk, I don't think that's a good idea for you emotionally. She's like, you haven't seen the emails. Yeah, because she's the one who sees them first. And she's like, I don't think you're going to cope well. And so I was like, well, thanks. I appreciate that. But I think I can handle it if I get into the right mindset. Because for me, as a therapist and as a professor, but particularly as a therapist, I can handle attacks. Like, I specialize in personality disorders. And thus I specialize in the ability to handle people hating me and having a straw man around me, having heard propaganda or thinking false things about me, or exaggerating things about me. Like, I'm used to that. It's my bread and butter. It is my safe, competent place. Like when I train my trainees, this is something that I feel very confident in and help my supervisees around this when it comes up. And I feel very sure of myself. I feel very competent. So I'll be telling my trainees, okay, you feel like crap because your client is attacking you. Why are they attacking you? And find the compassionate conceptualization. They're doing that because they're transferring to you, and it's a normal part of their personality disorder. So, buck up. Clients will sometimes dislike you because of their disorders. Every client is different, but some are going to come to you with this issue, and you're just going to have to deal with it, and there's ways of coping, but you can't avoid it, and you can't say, I don't want to do this, because this is therapy. This is working with people. So now I'm not that harsh, but I'm in that direction, as you can hear me rant about sometimes. And I got good at that early in my career. I've been good at that for decades. So it's not a matter of not being able to handle criticism. It's a matter of the nature of the criticism, because it's so, I don't have the ability to have a back and forth with these people. I can't hear their inflection, and they can't see my face. The technique that I found is that as I was reading those emails and those episodes, those videos and those audio episodes in which I'm reading every email, even the ones that are mean to me, I found myself relaxing. I found myself actually habituating. My body, my PTSD was healing because I wasn't avoiding the stimulus, and I was going into it with an open mind and with relaxation involved. If you listen to those episodes, you heard me actually say things like, I need to, I'm getting worked up. I would say, oh, my heart's starting to race. And so I would ground myself. And this is exactly what exposure therapy is. Now, you don't want to do exposure therapy without guidance, but I'm a therapist. I do exposure therapy with clients. I know how to do it to myself. So, and if it was severe, I would actually hire someone to help me, but it wasn't severe. So I was able to do it. But I noticed I did emotional regulation. I exposed myself to the stimulus. I exposed myself for a lengthy amount of time. I continued to, tell myself. And the other thing about exposing myself to the stimulus of the negative emails is sometimes I would skim the email or just read the first couple sentences, and there would be hurtful things right away. And then I would turn away from the email completely or the comment completely. And I think that was also hurting me to some extent. So for me to read the entire emails, there were things in the email where I was like, oh, okay, they're not heartless. They care, they have remorse. Or I would hear things that they're saying that indicated to me that there's something going on there with some of these people where they're not seeing things rationally. There's a lot of different roads to being distorted and different venues of being distorted. And certainly people could be distorted about me. And there were some comments and emails that seemed to look that way to me. I didn't discount what they were saying, but I just thought, I wonder what they're dealing with there, because that doesn't sound balanced, So instead of just reading the topic sentence and walking away and having an idea of where that person is coming from and exaggerating it, just reading the email actually exposed me completely to the reality of what they were saying and made it less hurtful to me because I was, again, habituating. The other thing that I would say is that I try to remember that I'm probably distorting, and Stacy actually helps me with this. So sometimes I'll read an email or a comment, and later on the day, Stacy and I'll be on a walk and I'll start ranting about it. Oh, this person said this. Why would they say that? And Stacy would be like, well, I read that email or comment as well, and I don't think you're understanding what they were saying, And I'll be like, huh? And in the beginning I thought, well, she just doesn't know, but over time I've learned. And so I'll actually turn to her and be like, oh, okay, so what am I distorting here? Like, what am I missing? And Stacey will be like, I think the person was being much less critical than you're taking it. And that's another aspect to this. It's just trying to remember that I'm probably blowing it out of proportion given my sensitivity. The other thing that I have done over the years is building a community. If people are working online, content providers in particular, then you want to build a community, moderators, for example, but even just a cultural tone, a cultural norm within particular forums, right? Like Discord and the Facebook fan page, the Instagram, the YouTube channel. Each forum has its own culture, its own cultural norms. And when people are new to that culture, they get indoctrinated into the norms of that culture, right? So the other thing, and I have a lot to do with that, right? Not only do I talk with the moderators and say like, well, let's kind of go in this direction, let's go, but also I set the tone, right? And you kind of reap what you sow. And actually, patron Junie Desiree, who has a YouTube channel where she does journaling, you look her up, Junie Desiree, she actually sent me this video of Lindsey Ellis. You're probably not familiar with her, but you might be. She was and is an author and was a YouTuber who would review movies and stuff. And she was recently canceled. She even used that word herself because of a tweet that she made last year. I won't go into the details, but it was a really interesting story. And she felt as though she was being unfairly attacked by a lot of people online. And she probably was, but I don't know. And it just seemed like this huge tragedy. And then the end result actually was a year ago, even though she was big on Twitter and had a very popular Twitter account, she canceled her Twitter account. And then that caused a whole other crap storm where people were attacking her because she canceled her account. And then she kept her YouTube channel, but then eventually she stopped making videos on YouTube as well, even though she has, 1 million or 2 subscribers. This is a similar story to William Osmond. They're very different people, Lindsey Ellis, William Osmond, but a similar thing that was happening where it's just like she just couldn't deal with the negativity anymore. She's like, I'm just not going to do this anymore, even though she was successful making money from YouTube. And so I watched those videos, and it was very educational. And Lindsey Ellis seems like a very articulate writer and speaker, and she was going through all the things. And I don't know, maybe some of you know more about her, and you're like, no, actually, she's a horrible person. But the other thing that I learned from it, because Junie actually asked me to watch this stuff, was I started watching some of her actual content where she's not talking about being canceled, like her film reviews, this kind of thing. And I watched a couple of her videos, and she's pretty snarky, and she's pretty negative and critical of movies and directors. And like, she did a whole long episode about Game of Thrones, and she wasn't out of the ordinary. She's very normal regarding YouTube commentary, but negative. If you were the 2 fellas that were the creators of Game of Thrones, you might be hurt by some of the things that she was saying. She was being pretty pointed. Now, that's fair, right? And she's not alone. And a lot of people don't like the last couple seasons of Game of Thrones, and they will publicly criticize those 2 guys, David and David, or I can't remember their names, but the creators of Game of Thrones. And okay, rightfully so, I suppose. But in my mind, I was thinking, well, I don't have that kind of tone, right? And so I think you create a community around you based on the tone of your community. Like with Junie, for example, her channel on YouTube is very calming and accepting and caring and compassionate. And so her community on YouTube is also that way. Whereas if you're very snarky and trolly, then you kind of invite that into your comment cultural norm. Does that make sense? So I think that's another way of coping with this, right? Is you reap what you sow. You also can create a cultural norm around like, well, we're not going to go in this direction. And because I think about some people who have been canceled, and I think about how they were trolling others, right, in a way. And then when they get, when they say something racist or something that seems harmful, then it seems fair that they would be trolled back, right? By society or even by the fans to some extent. Whereas someone like me, I hope I don't come across that way, that it doesn't seem fair that people would come at me like that, right? And that's another thing that I also would think about was that some people, they live in that kind of trolly internet world. And so this is almost like their normal language that they do when they talk to people. And if I were more like that, I would be more accustomed to it, right? If I were more snarky and trolly online, critical, openly critical, and then, and because I see other content providers that are more like that, and when they get it back at times, I see them saying, well, yeah, I'm that way too, and so I kind of get it. I've been there. But when you're like me and you're not like that, and then suddenly people start doing that, but that's another thing for me to remember is it's like, well, for some people, this is kind of their normal way of communicating on the internet, right? It doesn't really reflect the intensity of their emotions. Now, that was only a subset of the people that were critical of me. But anyway, the last thing is that I feel like is left out from the literature and the commentary online is each content provider that is trying to cope with online harassment or bullying or severe criticism is you got to figure out for yourself what trauma is being triggered. We all have trauma around rejection and being wrong and being seen as stupid or making a mistake or making a faux pas or something. We all have humiliation and rejection trauma around that. And all of us need to figure out what that is specifically. And when we're triggered, we have to know that at the very least and help it to guide us in terms of what to do to cope, right? So for me, I figured out rather recently that I'm on the OCPD spectrum. And remember, the foundation of that is flaw trauma or flaw shame or shame trauma. I don't know exactly how to word that. I was wording it as flaw shame, but I feel like with borderline, if I'm going to say abandonment trauma, betrayal trauma, with OCPD, I think flaw trauma is a better phrase, right? You've been traumatized for having a flaw, and you've been rejected in a traumatizing way because of a flaw. And I have that in a minor way. My parents were 99% of the time great, but apparently there was some flaw trauma that I went through, some minor flaw trauma. And I, as a result, am perfectionistic, and the way that I manifest my perfectionism and orderliness is around when someone criticizes me, I need to be able to have a voice back. I don't need other people to agree with me because I'm used to people not agreeing with me, but I'm not used to not having a voice, which is ironic, right? Because I have such a voice platform with this podcast. But when people would just throw a comment or an email, I'm not good at being able to reply in a typing format that feels like I have a voice, because there's so much to say sometimes, and I don't know how it's being received. A big part of having a voice is having people understand what you're saying. And when I'm replying on YouTube or an email, I don't know if the other person really hears me, and thus I don't know if I have a voice in the matter, right? Like I was saying before, when a client criticizes me, I have a voice. I can just use my words and my facial expressions to express the multitude of things that I feel and think back to them. I might not talk very long. I might even just be like a 10-second response to the criticism from the client, but it's very satisfying to me to be able to respond in time to the person and also get a sense of how they received it. Because often the individuals will receive it at least moderately well. So on the internet, for whatever reason, I get triggered tremendously by that aspect where I can't just say it back to them, where they can't. The other thing that triggers me is that people will comment or email me, and I won't see the comment or email until days, weeks, months after the fact. And that also gives me tremendous anxiety because I wasn't able to respond to them immediately. And they've been stewing in this idea in my head for all this time. Whereas when a client or a student or my wife or a friend says something critical of me, I can in the moment respond right away. At the very least, to say something like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry," or something, right? And even if the individual doesn't accept it and they're just like, "Well, I don't accept your apology," at least I was able to say it, right? It's like it gives the other person a chance, and I can walk away going like, "Well, I tried, and I felt like I did an okay job of addressing what they were saying. They didn't like it, but at least I was given a day in court." And so with the trial episodes, with the emails, it was another eye-opening experience for me, because I felt like, okay, I guess this is the way I can have my day in court, that I read the emails to everyone or the comments to everyone and I respond. Now, the individuals who sent in the emails or commented, they might not hear it, but somehow that feels okay to me. I would really love for them to hear my response, and that is a big part of it to me, but it's not necessary because there's no way for me to know, right? But I feel like, because that's another aspect to the negative comments in particular, is that not only, or the Reddit posts that are negative, it's one thing if one person says something about me and emails to me. It feels like a private conversation between me and that person. It's another thing for someone to publicly announce that I'm this or that, right? So when someone's creating a Reddit mob or a mob in the YouTube comment section, and I don't use mob lightly, it feels like it's a proclamation to a crowd, right? There's a proclamation said in a town square that I am an evil human being, and there's a bunch of people clapping and crowding around that person. And thus my response, I feel, needs to be public, right? I need not only the speaker to hear me, but I need all the people that are clapping, i.e. thumbs upping this notion about me. I need them all at least to hear me, hear me have the rebuttal or hear me apologize. I've said this a million times, I think, but those mobs on Reddit and the mobs in the YouTube comment sections, the things that they're saying, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Can I apologize? I mean, did you assume that I disagree with you about these? Because the basis of the criticism is fine. It's just what they conclude from it. People would be like, you didn't get this right. And you're not taking into account this detail. And by assuming that she has borderline, it's wrong or something like, and if they just said those things directly to me in, at the moment, I would have been like, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Okay. I'll think about that, or I'll try to adjust for that, or I don't agree with you because of this, but I could see how you would say that. And I'm glad you're bringing that up. I mean, that's what I do with people in real life. I'm okay with criticism. I'm very okay with it, but it's the shouting from the mountaintops in a town square, if I might mix metaphors. And I'm just standing in the corner with duct tape over my face and I can't say anything. I can't respond. That's what's so triggering to me, is that silencing part, that it is like, ironically, for a content provider. So for me to be able to stand up on my mountain within the town square, if you will, and be able to say, I have heard you, let me respond, and say none of the original thumbs uppers or speakers were in the town square, at least there's a crowd of people that hear me, and they might say that guy's an idiot, but at least I was given my day in court. At least I could say something. It feels like I have closure. I said my piece. I'm not sitting in the corner with duct tape over my mouth. And so I learned that a part of my coping process is not only to, as I said earlier, expose myself when I'm ready and I can regulate to those situations, but also by responding, it satisfies my trauma. It satisfies what's being triggered. And in the future, actually, what I was brainstorming with Stacy is that wherever the mob starts, in the future, I might, I don't know but if I can handle it, I want to go to the mob right away and say, let's talk, and not necessarily in written form, because I have occasionally, there'll be certain Reddit mobs that I will try to comment in the Reddit, I'll try to, with my Reddit account, I'll be like, hey, I hear you, or here's my response. But that doesn't usually go that well. I think people I think they interpret it as being insincere or something, which it's not. And there's not a lot of empathy, when you have that anonymity. I think people feel like it's okay to continue. Like there's this one time when this small Reddit mob was attacking me, and I was having tremendous anxiety about it. And I thought, okay, I'll just respond. I'll just go there, and it's probably not a good idea, but I have to. And so this is me trying to get my voice, right? And so I said something along the lines of, I hear you and I'm sorry and you're right, but let me tell you, my heart is racing right now with fight or flight. I have adrenaline because of the way you're talking about me, and I'm like halfway crying. It hurts what you're saying. Like, you can criticize me, you can not like this, but why are you so, I don't know what to say, so hurtful, I guess is the word, with my track record of not only a podcaster, but a therapist. I've been 25 years, because a lot of the things that people attack me for, I'm like, how could, I don't know, it just, to bring it to another, well, anyway, you get my point. Like, people will attack me for being against borderline, for example. And I'm like, you couldn't possibly say that if you knew my career as a therapist, as a professor, as a supervisor, and as a podcaster. There are a few things in life that I could say definitively. And one is that I am not a force for evil against people with borderline. I know that about myself. And for people to say that to me, I'm like, well, maybe I said something in all the various things that I yammer on about that did hurt, or that was wrong, so to speak. But when you take my body of work, I don't know if there's many other people that have as much public content around destigmatization and deepening of understanding and compassion for people with borderline. Of course, there are other clinicians and researchers that have done a lot more work, Marshall Linehan, these sort of folks, but people online, people that, and I've been talking about it for 14 years, like at the very least, I'm up there, and for someone to accuse me of being a force for evil against people with borderline, I'm like, no, like maybe I said something that was, like I said, questionable for sure. And it's very hurtful to me, because I'm just like, that is completely antithetical. It's one of the core principles that I have followed since the beginning of my career, when I had my very first borderline client, the very beginning of my career, and, had an acceleration of education and experience and competence with borderline very early in my career. And from that point forward, I was an advocate and an activist for people with borderline. I was carrying the torch. I was, marching in that parade, if you will. And for someone to say that I'm against, anyway. So what I thought was that the next time this sort of mob happens, I would find some way of having some voice conversation with them, and maybe even put it on the air and be like, hey, mob, come on the podcast. Bring it. Let's talk about it. I probably will agree with a lot of the things you're saying. So because the way that the mob acts, they assume that I don't, right? They assume that I wouldn't agree with them. And maybe that's how the internet usually goes, right? Where someone gets canceled or mobbed and there's a defensive, quote unquote, apology about it. And that's not who I am. That's not mature. It's not differentiated. It's not wise. It's not human. It's not adult. Adults take responsibility and say, you're probably right, and I'm sorry. And I could see that. I'll try to change that. I'm sorry you went through that because of me. I can easily say that. And say it genuinely and truthfully, right? Like with Lindsey Ellis, what she was saying, I don't know if it's true, that she was incurring all this bullying on Twitter, and she was just like, well, I'll just cancel myself. Instead of people boycotting me, I'll just close my Twitter account and move on with my life. Clearly I don't get Twitter well enough to understand how to do all this sort of, so I'll just cancel myself. And then the bullying intensified tenfold because she canceled her Twitter account, because I think people figure that she's trying to hide something. I think that's always the assumption. And I get that too. When the mobs are attacking me, there's this assumption, explicit or implicit, in what they're saying, that they believe that I'm trying to hide something. Like they finally heard the real me, that I really am against borderline, and all that rhetoric and all that activism and all that research and all that work that I've done with people with borderline was fake. But what underneath it all is this secret anti-borderline person. And that's in their language. I've talked about this before, but a couple of years ago, I worded something badly or said something stupid around trauma. I think it was on sexual trauma. And I can't remember exactly what I was saying, but it was something that and people were upset that I was saying it. It was at a Darcy video that when I listened back to that, Stacy's like, people aren't liking what you just said. And it is just a phrase, I think. And when I listened back to it, I'm like, well, it's not that bad, because if you know me well enough, you know that what I mean by that is blah, blah, blah. And Stacy's like, well, but some people don't know you. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, of all the hours and hours and hours of shit I say, like, occasionally I'm going to say something stupid, right? And it was a stupid thing, and it didn't reflect how I felt about things. And I don't know, it was a brain fart of some sort, but anyway. And so Stacy was like, well, how about we trim it out? And I'm like, yeah, okay, go ahead, trim it out. Let's move on in life. Well, the mob was 10 times more incensed because I took it out, because they assumed that I was hiding something that I really felt. They didn't assume I took it out because it was a stupid ass thing to say. Like, how come you assume that, you know what I mean? And I feel like it's a version of transference that people have on the internet that people don't understand and know how to identify. If you grew up with a parent that was secretly against you, or secretly something that harmed you, then you're going to be very hypervigilant and distorted around other people having secret harms around them, right? So I feel like it's that assumption, right? And there have been famous examples where this has turned out to be true, right? You'll have a famous person who behind the scenes is very problematic. Think of someone like Bill Cosby, who later on in his life, he was in some of his early comedic work, he would talk about Spanish fly and this kind of thing. And looking back, we're like, oh, he was almost signaling to us that he had this problem, and we didn't see it. And behind those innocent remarks were a vast sea of abuse and horribleness that was happening. So I think there's popular examples where it did turn out to be that way, but I don't think it's the norm. Most people, when they have these kinds of problems and attitudes, it's much more easily seen, especially, and even with Bill Cosby, for example, many of the victims came forward. We just chose to ignore them. So it wasn't like it wasn't detectable. You know what I mean? Anyway, so yeah. Well, that's my very long answer to that. Definitely not lightning round. Let's take a break and then some more emails. All right, we're back from the break. Annual anonymous upper tier patron, she says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk and Podwife. I wondered if there is a way to have very low self-esteem, even if somebody grew up with secure attachments. My ride or die person in my life is my sister. She's 2 years older than me. She is the person that I can call at 3 a.m. This is the same sister that happens to be a very successful person. She's book smart, street smart, athletic, and kind. I realized very early in life that no matter what I do and what I achieve, it will only become 1/4 of what she does. So for me, I very much grew up in her shadows, and I have extreme low self-esteem. So can we have both secure attachment and low self-esteem?" End of email. Yeah, 100%. And you're describing it well, that, and maybe I don't emphasize this enough, that you can feel securely attached. Now, so what I'll say is if you experience insecure attachment and lack of attunement, you likely will have low self-esteem. But if you experience secure attachment and adequate attunement and safety and lack of chaos, then there's a lot of benefits to that, obviously. You have a good working model of self and others when it comes to attachments, right? But you can be traumatized by comparison, things like what you're talking about. Now, I would suspect that in your family, they didn't deal with this sufficiently. So, and you could consider this to be an attunement issue, that when you were growing up and your sister is just awesome at everything and say you're just average or maybe even above average, but you're just not as above average as your sister, the lack of attunement to you from your family, maybe even your sister, to know how you felt. Because it's one thing to feel like, well, I'm not as book smart as her, I'm not as street smart, I'm not as athletic, and I'm not even as kind as my sister, but I'm still a lovable human being. I still have value. I'm still a good person. So I'm guessing that something went wrong there. Something went wrong in the attunement, because if you must have shown signs at the age of 10 or 5 or 15 along these lines. And if your parents were truly attuned, they would have noticed, oh, she feels like crap. So, and you can make a child feel loved and still not as good at certain things as their sister, right? Or you will make, creative parents will be able to make you feel special and good at other things, right? It's like, well, she's never going to be as smart as her sister, and she's never going to be as athletic or even kind as her sister, but she is good at the following things. Parents will sort of go in those directions, or find something that you can do, like riding horses, or maybe you're a good singer or something, just finding your self-esteem areas. But so you might not feel insecurely attached, right? You might feel like, well, I feel relatively secure. But you might, in the attachment language, characterize it as you have an asterisk to the secure attachment, right? Or I guess you could just completely have it be a different subject altogether. You're securely attached, and you frequently find yourself feeling lesser than, given your success in life and your accomplishments or the way people see you. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue talking about something else or reading more emails. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.